Hey, Toy Family. Welcome to another edition of the Marsham Toy Hour. I'm Teresa Hawkins.
Where we discuss anything and everything designer toys. I'm Gary Ham.
Oh, good God.
And I don't care if you forget a line. I'm George.
She forgot it last time, so I figured on her second time of hosting she would get it right, but I'm going to go back into the background now.
It's fluid.
Whatever.
It's a fluid podcast.
What? Hey, look, I'm trying. I'm hosted again. I'm doing what I can. At least I didn't call everyone the ham bones like George.
That's true.
I like ham bone.
Marshamites.
I don't like that.
I don't either. I don't like either one of those. Surely there's something better out there.
The hamsters?
No, that's terrible too. How about listeners?
Yeah, the listeners, the toy fam. But anyway, so yeah, I'm trying to drive the ship a little bit. I may crash, but that's okay. Let's jump in. So we got another guest this week. This is actually someone who has been in the toy scene for over 10 years. So our guest is a toy producer based out of Chicago. He's been helping bring toys to life in the scene since 2007. And over the years, he's worked with a bunch of different artists: Shawnimals, 64 Colors, Chris Reiniak, Travis Lamp. It's Lamp, right? Not Lampy. I pray I got that right. More recently, Horrible Doorables, to name a few. Our guest today is Joe Summers of Squibbles, Inc. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Teresa, that was way better than a guy who's been in the scene for a long time doing things.
Hey,
I do
was
okay?
mine not accurate?
Yeah, I've been doing
Would have been
stuff.
accurate for today, too.
I know your intro in for Ben. I could have just repeated that. We could have just pressed play and replayed that for a million of our episodes over and over.
Thanks for joining, Joe.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So I gotta ask to start. Squibbles Inc. What's the story there? Made up.
Good question.
Well, when I came up with that name, Squibbles, it was around 2000. And I was doing a bunch of licensed stuff at the time. And this was sort of a design brand name that I'd come up with. And it was something I just made up. It's just a silly sounding word or whatever. And I added the INK at the end because so much of my stuff was sort of pen and ink designing, developing. So
Okay.
that's the name.
I like it.
No super deep meaning.
Hey, some of the best names are just made up goofy things. I like it. Squibbles.
Thanks.
It's cute. Squibbles. So you mentioned licensing work. So one of the things, I actually don't know what your history is or what your day job is or any of that, or what even brought you into the scene. Do you do work with toys on the daily? Is Squibbles like a side business and your day job is still toys?
Well, so back then, back in the mid-late 90s, I was an avid Pez collector and also vintage toy stuff. I was a pretty avid flea market goer and after I finished graduate school, I moved from the Detroit suburbs where I went to graduate school, and I moved to Chicago, and I was working in the font industry. And I kind of, after a couple of years, I realized that I wasn't really cut out for 9-to-5 work. So I wound up starting a collectible toy store. That store was called Summer Zoo and was pretty heavily doing Pez business. And I was like driving to Canada to buy gray market Pez dispensers because at the time, the Canadian market still got their product from Europe. And so they had characters like Asterix and Obelix or Pink Panther, characters that some Americans knew, but it, wasn't really something that was going to sell in a Walgreens. So I would drive to Canada, which is about a 5-hour drive from here in Chicago, and like load up my car with Pez dispensers from the candy wholesaler there, and then, drive it back and sell it in the store, and I would wholesale it then to other people around the country who either had a little mom and pop shop, or they may be people who like set up on the weekend at a flea market and sort of had a little gray market Pez distribution business. And that led me to a guy in Germany who was a distributor who basically, I'm not sure how up and up this deal was, but this is how it went down. And he basically contacted me and said, "Hey, you know, I know you deal with these Pez dispensers a lot. I have a way to do custom Pez dispensers, not custom molds, but like take existing molds and do weird colors." And so there was another guy in Michigan who was basically on par with what I was doing as well, and he had just done something also, and so I said, yeah, like I would love to do that. So I, with a buddy of mine who also has a collectible toy store here in Chicago, and actually his business is still going. That's called Quake Toys. Anybody who's looking for an old Star Wars figure. We decided to do Pez. One of the Pez dispenser styles is a truck. I don't know how familiar you guys are with the vast array of different Pez dispensers, but there's a style that are different semi trucks. So the what would normally be the head is like the cab of a truck, and then the shaft is the trailer. And so my buddy Dave and I decided that was the way to go, and nobody had ever done glow in the dark Pez dispensers before. So we did a series of black and GID and gray and GID truck and trailer Pez dispensers. And if you get a hold of a Pez price guide, I think to this day they're listed as Joe's trucks.
Whoa.
And I don't know what they're worth, but it was a fun little project, and that sort of gave me a taste for making stuff, like producing stuff. And so, fast forward a few years, and I do these trucks, and this other guy does some crazy colorway stuff, and suddenly like Pez USA is like, wait a minute. Now they're stepping on toes. So I never got a cease and desist or anything like that, but they then that's really since that time. If you go back and look at the history of Pez dispensers, you'll see a definite uptick in the number of new designs every year from like 1998 going on. And now they do new designs all the time. It wasn't just me. I mean, it was the Pez collecting community. Like basically, people couldn't get enough, and there was a demand for it. I mean, it's classic American capitalism, really, supply and demand. Well, so to finish the story, so I do this, and that goes okay, and then a couple of months later, maybe 6 months later, this guy walks into my store. And he's like, "Hey, are you Joe?" And yeah. He's like, "Yeah, Dave sent me down to talk to you. He said that you know everything Pez." So it turns out this guy was in the candy business. And again, this is late 90s. And around that time, candy novelty items, they went from being like a Pez dispenser or maybe the occasional seasonal item to being a completely whole aisle in Target. Whoa. Things like, the M&M mechanized candy dispensers and spin pops and, all the kind of gadgety crap.
Yeah.
You don't want to just buy your kid a 10-cent lollipop. You got to buy them a $3 battery operated thing so they can eat their sucker. And I don't remember what the numbers were, but like, that whole like type of business in the candy industry became like its own huge thing. And so this guy that walked into my shop, he had sort of inherited, meaning some other guys started this company and then bailed on it, and he was left with it. He was a sales guy. And so one of the licenses he had was for Pez. He's like, well, he tells me, like, I got to come up with some stuff to sell in the candy aisle. And then it came up that I had a design background. So I started helping him to design. His main thing was 10 boxes, 10 containers. To older people, that was, you didn't want just like a paper package of candy. Like you put it in a 10 and suddenly it like had more value. It's value added is the term they use.
Yeah.
So I'm designing like Beverly Hillbillies tins that would have whatever like cheap, crappy candy in, so that they could, stick it in the Christmas aisle at Target or wherever. And so I'm designing all these like different properties to do these things. And like I said, one of the things that he had a license for was Pez. And originally, they were going to do a Pez tin. So there had been historically in the past, there had been actually, in fact, Pez, when it was first, I'm totally talking about stuff that you guys don't have anything to do with toys. I'm sorry.
Pez is definitely related to toys.
Well, Pez originally wasn't a plastic dispenser. Originally in the 20s, when Pez was invented or came to be, in fact, Pez, P-E-Z, is short for pfefferminz, which is Austrian for peppermint.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so they were sold in a metal tin, like an Altoid.
Whoa.
Originally. And then
wait, so they used to not even have the little heads and the little...
No. The first dispensers basically looked like a lighter. Like they just had a little sort of thumb tab.
I think I've seen that before, where I've seen like recreations of the original dispenser.
Yeah. Well, there's a modern version of it that's slightly different. Like the first ones are very cool kind of Art Deco styled top, and the shaft's been the same pretty much the whole time, except like at one point in the 80s they added the feet. But yeah, so originally they were sold in tins. So there was all this old artwork, and I had a bunch of this stuff because I collected old like packaging and advertising stuff and all that stuff. So I was able to put this stuff together for him. But one of the tins that they wanted to do was in the shape of like a big Pez dispenser. And it would be like if you laid a Pez dispenser flat on its back, and then the lid was like the top, the face,
okay,
whatever. And so then the trading company that we were working with out of Hong Kong, this guy by the name of Howard, he says, for the price you're going to pay to make this tin, I could make you an actual dispenser. And I told the guy that I was working with, I'm like, we have to do this. Like the collector community would go crazy for these things. And so I set about developing what's called a giant Pez dispenser. And so it's about a foot tall Pez dispenser that actually dispenses a full pack of Pez at a time.
And this was something that you designed and it actually came out and everything?
Yeah, I developed it. And so the first one that I did was Peter Pez, which is the mascot clown. And then after that, we just started like going through the licenses.
This is nuts.
So we did, Peanuts, Muppets, Star Wars. At one point in time, we took the Peanuts license. And these are all like, it's not like I created brand new head designs. I'm basically adapting classic, Pez, little Pez dispensers and adapting them to these larger.
Into the big ones.
Yeah.
How are you allowed to do this? Did Pez give you permission?
Yeah, we had
Did
we had a
licensing give you
license.
permission?
We had a license, and so I
Through
would.
through your friend's candy company, they had the Pez license, which in turn gave you the ability to do all this stuff.
The company was called Brand New Products. Is what the name of the company was. This guy Steve, who walked into my store, like I said, he had been a sales guy for this company. I was living the life I dreamed of. I was basically buying and selling and living toys and advertising collectibles, and I just didn't want to give that up unless the offer was good. So this guy basically promised to make me a partner, and eventually I shut down the store, put it in storage, and most of it is still in storage. And basically, I just basically walked away from that business and started doing product development, and that meant, working with, like I said, all these licensing people, Peanuts, 20th Century Fox, doing Simpsons stuff, Muppets, all those things. And through work doing that Pez dispenser, giant Pez development, I was going to China regularly, and I was learning hands-on injection molding and
nice.
mold design. And whenever we would go, I just, we're there looking and proofing our stuff, but then somebody else is doing something different over here. I'm like, what's that? How do you do that? And basically learning other processes, and then taking things like old vintage candy containers that were maybe blow molded and saying, hey, we should develop a product based on this, so that, I had an excuse to do a blow molded project. And basically just collecting processes, like my bag of tricks. Like I want to learn a new trick for my bag. And that's what really got me into understanding and loving the process.
I really want to know what a blow mold is. Do you blow into it?
The machine does. So it's basically, imagine a block that's cut in half, and the two halves have the image. It's a mold. So the two halves get pushed together, and there's a hole in the top and a hole in the bottom. And there's this ooze, this tube of material that's like dripping out of a machine, like a snotty nose. And so the two molds clamp over top of that ooze, and then the machine blows air into it, and that basically inflates that tube of ooze to whatever shape the mold is. And then it gets cut off, and you've got a piece.
Cool.
Because it's Halloween. Think of like the classic pumpkin trick or treat sort of bucket.
That's a blow mold?
That's blow molded.
Oh, cool.
Think of isn't Shogun Warrior those things? Those are kind of blow
yes.
molded, right?
Yep. Those pieces, most of those parts are blow molded.
So we don't really use that for our scene. It's more mass market. That's cool though. Someone needs to start making blow mold toys. Cool. Okay. Well, that makes total sense. I mean, you kind of had this sort of crazy history, a love for Pez. It sort of led you into, that was kind of happenstance. This guy walked in, and then you started to do stuff with him, and then lo and behold, you're in factories, and it led you to today where you're producing toys in our scene. Yeah.
So one of the things, when I would go in the early days, this is late 90s, early 2000, we would fly into Hong Kong, and then we would like do day trips into China, because at the time it was like the idea of like spending any time in China seemed crazy. And so all of our trips to factories were like just over the border, basically. And so we would go, and then we would come back to Hong Kong that night and walk around, hang out in the city. And one of the cool things in Hong Kong, especially back then, was Temple Street Market, which is basically, again, going back to flea markets, basically this big giant street market that happens there in Hong Kong. And so I'm walking around there, and it's probably, I'm going to guess this was 2001, maybe. And I see these crazy, like really hard sort of edge, very stylized figures that were very urban. And I was like, whoa, like these pieces are cool. And of course, because they're here in the flea market, they're probably bootlegs. But like that, I came back and I was talking to a buddy of mine. I was like, oh man, on this last trip, I saw these figures, and they're rotocast. They're super cool. They're very designed. They're not of any character that I was aware of at the time. And it just like really stuck with me. And meanwhile, I'm like, up to my nose in licensing stuff, and all my day consists of, corresponding with some licensing agent someplace, or sending people specs, or sending people pictures of sculpts to make sure that everything's cool, and then doing package design, following the scripted design that I've got to follow and basically adapt their style to our packaging. And I'm doing all this stuff, and all the time I'm thinking about these figures. And then at some point I had picked up a Juxtapose magazine, and I see these kind of figures in Juxtapose, and I think they called them designer toys. And I was like, this is it. Like this is what I saw in Hong Kong. And so that sat with me for a while, and eventually, like in 2003, I left the brand new partnership and basically made Squibbles Inc. my own thing. And at that time, I was still doing licensed stuff. In fact, mostly I was doing Pez stuff still. Floaty pens, was making puzzles, and some stationary stuff. But all the while, I kept thinking about these toys, and I was talking to this buddy of mine about it. And eventually he said, oh, you got to go check out this place called Rotofugi. Like, they've got that kind of stuff there. And so this was like probably 2006. That summer, I walked into Rotofugi.
And your life changed.
And it really did. I struck up a conversation with Kirby. I had said something that was based about the process, talking something about the process of something that had been made. And he's like, oh, well, what do you do? And I'm like, well, I'm a product developer, but, I do a few different things. And one of the things that I was working on at the time was a mold for the Mold-A-Rama company here in Chicago.
Oh, cool.
Because I had contacted those guys trying to buy a machine.
For kicks to like have in your home?
Basically as like an art project.
Okay.
Again, like at this point, I'm just like a complete nerd for process, right? And this idea that like I could have one of these things and make like small edition figures out of a vintage piece of equipment, I couldn't think of anything that would be better than that. But at the time I was working on the mold, and it came up with Kirby, and Kirby was also a huge Mold-A-Rama fan. And he confessed at the time, he's like, yeah, I've always dreamed like to have one of those machines here in the store. And at the time, I still thought maybe I was going to be able to get one. And I thought, okay, great. Like now I got a place to put it even. So anyway, that led me to thinking, hey, why am I still like chasing this licensed stuff? I want to make the stuff that's in this store. This is the kind of stuff I want to be spending my time and energy on. And, a couple of conversations later with Kirby and Whitney, a relationship was built, and the rest is history.
Wow, that was only our first question.
So,
what? So are you the one that made the mold for the Tim Biscuit piece for that Mold-A-Rama?
Yes.
The Helper Dragon.
And was that mold made in the States, or was that made in China and brought over?
Tim sculpted that piece, basically sent me, I think it was a resin cast that he sent me. I took that piece and took care of all the undercuts and everything because it has to be a 2-part mold, so it can't have undercuts.
Right.
And it got sized down a little bit. And then, I made the pattern for the 2 mold halves and took it over to a local foundry here in Chicago and had it a lost wax aluminum casting made, cleaned it up and put it on the machine.
Oh, that's amazing.
So so you established this relationship with Rotofugi. So has the majority of stuff you've done in the scene been in collaboration with them? At least in the beginning it was, right? So was
it was completely in the beginning, it was completely.
Okay. And so what was your very first toy production?
Finished. The first designer, what would fall into the designer toy category, would be the Shawnimals micro plush, which aren't vinyl. Obviously, they're the ugly stepsister of designer toys. They're plush. but that was the first series that was produced and released.
So what was your first foray into vinyl?
First vinyls were Travis Lampy Teardrips and 64 Colors Marshalls.
A couple favorites, designer toy classics, actually.
Man, okay.
Those 2 blind boxes. And that would have been 2009 or 2010.
Was it that late? I feel like it was so much earlier than that.
Yeah, I know. But I think technically it was probably 2009 then.
Now that we're kind of getting into the toy thing, so I know we haven't really even mentioned yet all the different things you're connected with. I know I did a quick rundown of some artists in the beginning, but when I think of Squibbles Inc., I think of, like you mentioned, the Travis Lamp Teardrops, and then 64 Colors. I think about all the Marshalls and the little gumdrop dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also think a lot, everyone knows that I really love Chris Raniak's work, but I think about all the stuff you've done with him as well. I know you've done the Cynoboras and the Muscamoots back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And then more recently, you've done Algonac. So I don't know, I feel like you've kind of been around and doing stuff for a while with a variety of different artists.
So one of the key things when Kirby and Whitney and I first met up was, we talked a lot about being in Chicago and being in the Midwest. And at the time, there were there were people making work in the scene as far as like customs and things, but there weren't really any vinyl actual figures or pieces being produced by Midwest designers or artists. And although it was like never like a hard mission statement, we were definitely dedicated to focusing on Midwest artists and designers. And that's why if you run through the roster of people that we've worked with, they're all basically Midwest people. The only exceptions are, the Tim Biscuit Helper Dragon Moldorama piece, which maybe we count that, maybe we don't. The Shag figures we did those in conjunction with...
Are those the Shag Racers?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so the Shriner and the Skullboy were both done separately as a part of 2 different shows that were exhibits that happened at Rotofugi. So that was our sort of loophole to work with, Shag, who's, Josh's West Coast artist. And then later I did the larger Jerome smoking ice creams with Frank Kozik. But that also originally was supposed to be in conjunction with a show that was going to happen. And then through a series of truly misfortunate events, that show never happened, but we produced those pieces.
That's cool, though, that you had to focus on sort of the Midwest side of the states and pulling in. It makes sense, all those different artists that were in the area and making their work. So even the Jeremy Tinder Toys?
Yeah, Jeremy's here in Chicago.
Oh, okay.
He's a comic artist and teaches at the Art Institute. Friend and family of the store. And that was very much Kirby. Kirby was, he's like, I think this guy's stuff is perfect. And, as soon as I saw it, I was like, absolutely. Like, how fast can we make them?
So that was one thing I was going to ask, is how the whole relationship worked. So I know at the beginning it was a collaboration with you and Rotofugi. So did Kirby kind of handle the relationships of reaching out to artists or making connections with them and then just bring it to you and say, hey, help me get this done? Or did you have involvement in establishing any of those relationships and saying, hey, we should really look at this person and pull them in and make stuff for them?
Yeah, it was absolutely a collaboration. The relationship was built around the fact that I was an outsider to the scene. I didn't want to just like start making stuff and like show up and say, hey, does anybody want to buy my stuff? I saw the relationship with Rotofugi to be two different things. One, they had street cred and an amazing setup. The gallery shows and their assortment of offerings have always been stellar, but people knew who they were and they had relationships with people. I didn't have to cold call somebody and say, hey, I think your drawing would make a cool toy. There's already a relationship there. For example, the Travis Lampy teardrips, those originally were part of a show that he did at Rotofugi Gallery. And originally they were these two pieces of canvas sewn together. And then those faces were painted on the canvas. And at that show, I pulled Kirby aside and I said, hey, I think these would make cool vinyl toys. I mean, this was at the opening of the show. And so he's like, all right, well, let's talk to Travis. And so we pulled Travis over to the side and we're like, hey, we think this would be a cool vinyl toy. And Travis was like, okay, you got it.
Cool.
Let's do it.
And so, yeah, I've actually always wondered that, like, as someone who produces, it seems like inspiration can come from anywhere. So if you wanted to help make a toy for someone, or someone reached out and said, hey, help me make a toy for me, I mean, will you pretty much accept inspiration from anywhere? So whether it's a sketch on a napkin or a piece like that, like a 2D piece or a different fine art piece as inspiration, can you pretty much start from anywhere and start making it happen?
Sure. Yeah. My personal approach to production is that it is a collaboration. I can't stress that enough. I don't care if it's just a concept that somebody just speaks, so long as everybody who's involved is open-minded and willing to like work it out. Who knows what can happen? The Marshall figure was originally one of those letterpress prints. And Kirby said to me, he's like, hey, I think this figure has the potential to be something. And I looked at it and I said, absolutely. Like, that looks like classic advertising figure to me. Let's do it. And so, he contacted Eric and, we worked through the process. There was just that 2D image of that letterpress print. And so I went home after Eric agreed that he would be on board to do something, and I sculpted a figure, sent him pictures, and he said, okay, I like this, but I think it needs to be more like that. And, I made revisions and we worked on it until he was happy with it. And I knew it was something I could produce. And then we go to the next step.
Marshall's your longest running figure, isn't it? It's going on almost 10 years now, and you're still doing occasional colorways and iterations of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Marshall is sort of an evergreen figure. Like, he's just simply wonderful in the sense that, like, anybody can look at it and sort of get it, whether you're 3 or 90. And the design, the simple face of it is attractive. I mean, everybody loves that kind of clean, classic style. Well, not everybody, but
the smart people do, Joe.
I know.
That's
For those not familiar, the Marshall is a 2.5 inch, 2-inch vinyl toy that Joe's produced along with Rotofugi. They worked with 64 Colors, Eric and Laura. Eric was the designer of Marshall, and it's pretty much, you would describe probably bestly as just a classic marshmallow mascot character. It's a very simple design, probably very easy for paint application. I believe you do all the paint application yourself, don't you? You do the mask and the paint work and all that stuff, don't you?
Well, so for the production stuff, like Marshall series, those are pad printed. That's done overseas.
Okay.
I do have a pad printer at my studio here, but I've never gotten it to work very well for me. So very few pieces have I like just small run edition stuff.
Why was I thinking that you did do some pad printing on pieces? Like maybe it was the dumplings, the pork dumplings that you do with My Plastic Heart, or I feel like you did do some hand painting of this. Was it the Sniboras that you're airbrushing?
Yeah. So what happened was I was making the blind box stuff, which was great, but it was basically me doing a lot of production work, sort of being so I sort of picture myself as like the Phil Spector of the scene. As far as like those collaborations, I'm the producer in the other room, George Martin, if you will, that's like working with somebody like the Beatles, who are the real rock stars of these pieces. Like a Chris Reiniak figure, those figures are Chris Reiniak figures. Those are his characters that he designed. I'm really just helping to bring those to fruition. And that's, I'm happy to do that. I love doing that work. It is very satisfying. But at the same time, I'm also a creative and I like to do stuff. So pretty early on, around 2008, I think it was the first Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con we did. There was a custom show. And one of the customs was this Chris Reiniak custom. And for the most part, Chris was really mostly a painter at the time. He was doing customs too. I remember like he had these like really crazy, almost dark type of paintings that he did that were, to look at them, you could definitely see like that's a Chris Reiniak application. But there was this one particular figure, and I had been talking to Kirby about wanting to do this sort of Americanized kaiju series. Quite honestly, like partly it was because I knew at some point I figured I would wind up sculpting something for it, but also because I knew that I could produce these blank vinyls and then I could do paint runs. Like I could do basically custom editions. So that's how the Muscamoot came about, which was the first vinyl toy. In that, it's called the Lake Monster series. My original name for it was Shikaiju.
Oh, you should have that.
No, George.
But at the time, there were a lot of, we can do this, but we can't do that. And a lot of that was stuff that Kirby was relaying to me. Because I'm fairly new to the scene, right? And I don't know that there are taboos, the whole like sofubi versus soft vinyl. And, is this kaiju or is this not kaiju? All this kind of stuff. So we gave all that kind of stuff a wide berth because we didn't want to alienate anybody. And
kaiju would have been so good. Like you should still use that.
I had the domain name registered and everything. And Kirby was just like, no way. And so the like sort of project name for it was called the Lake Monsters because of the Great Lakes and because we pretty quickly got Chris signed on to the project. And the plan was that we would make these different pieces by different Midwest artists, but that Chris or I would sculpt them. So that was how that sort of came about. But, to this day, I don't know how many different Muscamoots we ever did. And we did just as many different, probably more Sniboras. It was basically a release for every big show we did, including like some holidays or seasonal things.
Did you end up sculpting those, or did Chris do them?
All of the lake monsters ever produced as lake monsters were sculpted by Chris. The only thing is the dredge that was a Brian Morris character. Chris did 90% of that sculpt, and then I sort of finished it.
Interesting. So it seems like depending upon the project, there was different roles you played. Like some people did the sculpt and handed it to you. Some you did the sculpt on your own.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just depended upon the use case.
Yeah. I mean, everything I think, except for the stuff that Chris was involved in, I sculpted. No, that's not true. The pork dumpling series through My Plastic Heart, I think Lamont sculpted those.
I don't know why, but I just didn't realize you did the sculpting stuff too. I don't know why. I should have known that. I guess there's usually
no sculpt credit.
Well, I guess it's just whenever we have different guests on, we hear different approaches. So some people, like a George, will be hired to do a sculpt. They get to hand it off to someone who does the mold and hand it off to someone else who does the paint. And, like it seems like sometimes you hand off to a bunch of people, but you've really been running Squibbles Inc. as sort of you kind of can do it from start to finish essentially and step in at whatever point you're needed. So if someone wanted to work with you, if someone said, I want to make a toy with you, it could start, like we said, from anything from a sketch to a sculpt to a 3D print to whatever. You could start at any point and help get it produced, it sounds like.
Yeah. And I that's not to say that I do every step. I don't do any wax work. The molds are obviously made by a mold maker, but I definitely oversee that stuff. I've done it enough to know when something, like I was listening to the interview you guys did with Corey, Science Patrol, and just like listening to that episode and like nodding my head in agreement a lot because I remember him talking about like, people give you stuff and it's, this arm's going this way and another thing's going another direction. And sometimes you got to tell people like, okay, that you'll never get that out of the mold if that's the way it is.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of coaching. And
I was going to ask that too. I mean, I'm sure you know a lot about joints and size and molds and what's capable. So I'm sure along the way you're providing a lot of design feedback and recommendations, right? Of, someone says, hey, I want to do this. You can be like, yeah, you could, but, you can't do it exactly like this because there's no way that's going to be feasible.
Yeah, always limitations.
Now, have you worked with one dedicated factory in China this whole time? Have you tried different stuff? Have you tried Japanese production?
I wish I had one reliable source. I've worked with so many different places. That's what led me to, basically starting my own place.
Your own place here in the States or your own place in China?
My own place in China.
Wow. I didn't know that.
I didn't either. I was like, what do you mean? So you have your factory is yours?
Yeah, I own two Rotocast machines and 2 Slushcast setups.
So is this like what Corey was talking about, where you sort of almost rent space out of other factories and use your machines out of that area? I'm not exactly understanding how you're running a factory when you live here in the States, but your factory's over there.
Well, it's,
right?
Nowadays, it has a lot of thanks to a buddy of mine who goes back to, this is a guy I met back when I was doing giant Pez dispensers. He's a Hong Kong guy that lives in Shenzhen area now. His name's Sam, and he basically helps me to manage everything. And so I spend a good part of my evening and early morning on WeChat going over this and that and responding to samples or issues with waxes or this and that.
Wow. So this is a full-time operational factory that you run, or is it just sporadically ran depending on projects?
I hesitate to call it a factory even. The concept had always been, originally in 2008, when I first tried to start this, it all came about because there was a Brian Morris piece that was going to be the first vinyl figure we were going to do. And it was a bust of a little boy. And it was going to be a series. It was called The Family. And the little boy was just the first piece of the series. And I don't know if there are pictures out in the wild of this thing or not. I know we were naive enough to announce it, that we were gonna do this. And long story short, like, I couldn't find a factory to do it. This thing was going to be pad printed all over, just one color on top of another color. But at the time, in 2007, I couldn't find a factory. Like, every time I would say, like, yeah, we want to do editions of like 300 pieces, everybody would look at me cross-eyed and laugh.
Right.
And we'd go sit down in a factory office, and I'd show them the prototype. And the vinyl piece itself is easy enough. It's just a straightforward rotocast bust. But then the decoration, the deco, as we call it, was like just overlaid, this sort of tattoo style overlay over the entire thing. And people would be like, oh yeah, we could do that. Like, look at all this great stuff we do. We could do that. And we'd be like, okay, great. Like, we want to do 300 pieces each in, these 3 different colors. And then they would go, oh, okay. Let us get you a number. And like 2 hours later, we'd be someplace else, and we'd get a phone call, and they'd be like, we're not going to do it. Nobody
I've found
ever
pictures online. It's an awesome looking piece.
I would still love to make that piece, because I could make that piece now.
Yeah.
But Brian's like, nah, that's in the past. Like, I don't want it made. So out of respect for him, it'll never be made.
That's too bad. It's really cool.
But that led me, like, I bet I went to 15 different factories over the course of 6 months, 9 months. And like thinking like, okay, this place is going to do it. Like, they can do it. They're going to do it. And I would tell people, like, these are factories in 2008. They're used to making stuff for a nickel, but they want to make 20,000 of them. Then I'm like, okay, well, I'll pay you whatever it would cost me to make 20,000 of these, but I only want 300.
Right.
Like, whatever that math is, just, and still no one wanted to do it.
Joe, I can totally relate. I started self-producing around, I want to say 2007, something like that. And yeah, back then, asking for a factory to do anything less than 1,000 units of anything was unheard of. They just scoffed at it. They wanted nothing to do with it. And, my first piece, I think I did, it was a run of 600. And even getting that done was not an easy task.
Yeah. It just went to eventually I finally got it through my thick head. It's like, they don't want the hassle of stopping everything they're doing and doing this thing that's going to take them, a couple of days maybe only, and disrupt all this other workflow. And it's like, well, but I'll pay you for that 2 days work. I'll pay you for a half month's worth of wages. Right. And it's like, no, it's a distraction to everything else. They don't, they don't want to do that.
Does it make us idiots for wanting to?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess.
It does, because those companies are smart. They understand what margins are. They want 20,000 units in a nickel each. But designer toy people, or at least the smaller independent producer ones, we're willing to say, hey, make a run of 300 of that thing, and I'll give you $20 to $40 a unit price. And that just doesn't make sense in the real world. Those are not margins that make sense. It's crazy.
It is. And all I can say is it's masochistic in some way. I don't know.
You're probably not wrong about that, but I think what it really comes down to is most of us just love toys. We love making them. We want to see and design and make toys. The money side comes isn't really in the forefront of our minds. If we make money at it, great. But most of us are not doing this as full-time day jobs. This is what we do as a passion project. We work the day jobs to have the luxury of doing this crazy thing called toys.
Yeah, I mean, I have a client here in Chicago that's in the Halloween business. I do all their product development. Well, I don't do all their mask sculpting. A friend of mine actually does most of that. But I do all their package design and I do all their sourcing overseas and stuff like that. And honestly, like, I mean, I don't like go there every day. Like I said, they're a client, but like that's my bread and butter. That's how I feed my kids. Mm-hmm. It's not through vinyl toys, 25 pieces at a time.
Right.
It's through Halloween masks.
It's a Halloween industry. The company's called Zagoni Studios, and they're the real deal when it comes to Halloween masks. And the actual masks are made here in the U.S., here in the Chicago area, and they're all, hand painted. They're, hand poured latex masks that are then all hand cut and hand painted and hand assembled.
Wow.
Interesting. Well, being the designer toys is kind of more of a passion project. I know as of late, it started out with a relationship with Rotofugi, but it seems like you've branched off a bit from that and aren't necessarily working as hand in hand with them and even going into your own sort of things.
Yeah. Rotofugi is still there, and we still have projects that we do, and
like Algonac, I know is
Algonac is a joint, Squibbles Inc. plus Rotofugi, which is the official brand of our joint stuff. There's I just recently sort of re-released some of the mini Marshalls and gumdrops as a blind box, and that's a Squibbles Inc. plus Rotofugi item. I guess it's been a couple of years since I introduced, and I won't be surprised if nobody's heard of this, but Eatsy Charms, which are little plush zipper pull type things.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Yeah, one of those series is a Shawnimals Ninja series, and then the other series is a set of my characters that are called Under the Weather. And so some of that stuff is, and the stuff that I'm doing that's basically just a Squibbles item, that's tending to be more of like my own pet projects. There are still Squibbles Inc. plus Rotofugi things in the works and things that are happening. But okay. I've got a piece.
I just think about, like, I know you've worked with Horrible Doorables recently on their familiars, and then I think about like the Moody Bears you just released, and I know I saw at NYCC the CN Folk Tiger. So it just seemed like, as of late at least, I know you have been working with Rotofugi and doing stuff with them, but I've been seeing a few other things as well that seemed kind of just to be branching out of it.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm definitely doing like more production stuff for like basically OEM work for other people. So the Tarbis, I know George's favorite.
The Doomco Tardigrade.
Yeah, the Tardigrade. Like that piece, Kent basically came to me. He was a new guy to the scene. In a lot of ways, the same way that I kind of hitched my wagon to Rotofugi, he came to me and said, "Hey, you're already a part of this. Can you both help me produce this and sort of educate me?" He has like a design engineering background. Can you help me understand this process and learn this process? And I want to put your logo on it too. I said, sure, great. I think it's a cute little figure. And it's certainly been successful. But as far as like pieces produced, we're on the second set of molds. We wore out the first set of molds on that thing.
That's awesome.
So projects like that, there are a number of projects that I've produced that I don't ever say whose work I do. I figure it's up to those people to tell that. But
to say if it was you or not,
whether I'm doing the production on it. Most people don't necessarily know what factory is producing what, and even with that, there's plenty of people. Like 330 is a production company, but they don't have a factory per se. They're still using another entity to do production work. And that's typically true for most people.
Do you like being a silent partner in regards to that sort of stuff? Would you like people to know that you're helping to manufacture and produce some of these things, or do you just like being just part of the project in general?
Well, I don't need I don't cry to myself to sleep at night when people don't mention me. But I think that a lot of people have known that I do this. Not everybody, but a number of people have known. And to be honest, there were a number. So I originally started to try and open, we'll call it a factory. It's really a production studio. I'm not set up like a big factory with a giant production line and all of that. It's very much more of a what I like to call a studio or workshop type.
It's like
setup.
The mom and pop's a factory. It's like a mom and pop factory.
It is. And in fact, literally there's a guy, Mr. Lee, who does all the vinyl pulling, and his wife, Mrs. Shang, does all the post pull work. She does all the cutting and so those are the two people that, right now, if I log into the webcam, that they're there working. And then, like I mentioned earlier, my buddy Sam helps me sort of manage things.
I like that you're kind of like Big Brother, just watching from the webcam.
I know. No, but I mean, I think I get what you're saying about, I think it's even like with you, George. There's a million things I think you're behind that no one had any idea. But at the same time, when it's production, I would expect like your logo to be on the toy or on the packaging. But is that not always the case? Is there stuff that you've worked on that's not actually visibly on the toy or on the package?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Teresa, rarely do you ever know who the factory was that manufactured a toy. Usually that's an unknown entity. People don't usually share that information unless that factory or that sculptor is actually giving you a deal on something. Yeah, then you'll give them some recognition, but otherwise they're mainly just a work for hire.
Yeah.
I think I'm confusing it more with when you collaborate, I guess, on a different level. Like not just truly provide the factory connection, but actually assist with like the sculpt or something. I don't know. I just know that there's stuff that will specifically say like Squibbles Inc. / whatever.
Right.
So what is the difference there? What's the difference between I was just a factor behind the scenes versus someone who's calling it a Raniac / Squibbles Inc. production or Horrible Adorable? You know what I mean? Like where's that line drawn? What makes it something that your name is tied to versus isn't?
Well, more often than not, if my name is on it front and center, I probably have skin in the game.
Okay.
Meaning I partially financed it maybe or something to that effect. But not always. Sometimes, it just depends on the circumstance. And it depends on the relationship of, the people I'm working with. But I never ask if somebody were to contact me and say, hey, I've got this figure. I need to get it produced. Can you make it for me? I make up, I'd write up a quote and send it to them. And they either say, okay, great. Or they say, well, gee, really? It's that much?
It's usually the latter.
It's usually the latter. Honestly, I don't know what people think. It's not cheap, but it's also, you don't necessarily have to mortgage your house to make a toy. It just depends on what you want to make. Do you want to make like a figure as simple as like a Marshall, which is 2 pieces and 5 pad prints? Or do you want to make this like crazy 8-inch has 200 pad prints on it? Because depending on what you want to do and how many pieces you're willing to invest into it, it may be pretty spendy or it may be, $5,000. You can make a toy for $5,000.
And so, okay, so one question I feel like I hear a lot is people who are coming into the scene or trying to create toys. They're trying to ask themselves, should I try to self-produce or work with someone to produce it, like partnering with someone like you? And do you feel like a lot of times part of that decision is around cost? Is there other things that would go into it? So, like if someone said to you, hey, should I self-produce or get it produced with someone with a factory? What would you feel like are the decisions that would go into making that choice, aside from money, aside from cost?
Well, I mean, for me, it has to do with, who has what responsibility. If I've got a project that somebody comes to me and says, hey, I want to make this figure, will you produce it and sell it and, market it, all the things that go into making a toy and selling that toy, then, that's a big ask. And if I'm putting money on the line and all that stuff, of course, my name's going to be in bold print on the very top. Yeah. But if somebody's just asking me like, hey, I want to make this toy, I'm only going to make this many. It's my little pet project. I'm going to sell them at shows or on Instagram releases or whatever. Then I don't need to have any sort of name in that game. That's their business. They're paying me for a service, and it's pretty straightforward. I get paid when the stuff gets delivered. I get paid a deposit and then balance when stuff is delivered. So I don't have any risk. I'm just providing a service.
So when it comes down to someone doing that sort of side hobby sort of thing where you don't have as much skin in the game, is really the ultimate choice between whether or not, so let's say I had this toy idea. I want to make it. I don't want to make that many. It's a side thing I want to do. And I'm trying to decide, do I go to Joe and have Joe go make this in his factory, or do I somehow figure out to do resin casting on my own or what have you, and I do it from home? What is the ultimate choice there really just around cost and material? Like, is there a pro or con to either of those choices, or is it really just ultimately down to what you can afford?
Well, of course, a lot of it has to do with what you can afford. But, if we go back to my initial relationship with Rotofugi, that wasn't just like me, hitching my wagon to their name. It was a huge, huge part of that was me also saying, hey, I have this skill set. I can get things made. You guys can sell it. And so the relationship was always balanced in a 50-50 sort of. I was production, they were sales and marketing. I shouldn't say past tense. They are sales and marketing. We're 50-50 in things as far as me doing production and then handing it off to them and then them selling it. So if you're an artist and you're going to have, you're going to go to 5 Points or Decon or wherever and set up and put your stuff out, then you just need somebody to make the stuff for you and enable you to put the best quality product that you can out.
Yeah.
That's what I've tried to build as from the production side. It's originally started for myself, but to be quite frank, it costs a lot of money to have, rent a space and own these machines and pay the light bill and all that stuff. So I have to rely on other people's orders to fill my day.
Yeah. Well, and I think you even also commented on the fact that, you with it comes knowledge of what is feasible and what's doable and just what can be done. So you bring that to the table as well.
Absolutely. I've also, a while back, you guys had that little discussion about Sofubi and, if it's not made in Japan, is it Sofubi and that whole discussion. And, I made sort of a little quip in the postings about, well, I've basically taken that technology and learned that process and in turn taught it to Mr. Lee and buy Cobasol materials and exclusively produce my stuff in that fashion with those materials in hopes that collectors and people in the scene will recognize that this is quality product. And in turn, then offer that to customers who want to make things and don't want to either get in line to have it made in Japan or, can't afford to make it in Japan.
Yep.
And so
speaking of quality product, do you feel like there's sort of a competition in the scene between different producers? I mean, do you feel like you're having to compete with other producers out there, especially if, let's say, there are producers making pieces by the same artist around the same time frame? Do you feel like you're having to sort of compete with those companies as far as when you get stuff out and the quality of the way you make your products, you can kind of shine above? Or is it sort of a, hey, it's okay, you're doing your thing, I'm doing my thing, and I don't care if a bunch of people are doing Rhinex stuff at the same time, I'll just keep doing my thing?
Well, as far as like outshining anybody, that's not my goal per se. I mean, my goal is to make, the best quality stuff I can make. Whether a series of Figglebits are quote unquote better than a Thimble Stump Hollow, they're two different things. And I'm not preoccupied with what's a Thimble Stump Hollow figure look like. Chris does amazing work and he has high standards, and he wants the pieces that have his name on it to reflect those standards, and they should. And I feel obliged to meet those standards. Teresa, as a collector, I would, I don't want you to walk up to my table and pick up a Rhineac figure and go, I'm going to pass on this one. I want you to pick it up and say, this has got to go in my collection.
Yeah, which makes sense. I mean, and I think the other thing too is, I don't know, there's certain companies out there like the Unboxes and the Pop Marts of the world where they're just pumping out stuff left and right. I mean, it's just like product after product after product. And I just wonder, like, as a smaller producer, do you feel like it's hard to keep up and keep your prices in line with others in the industry and with the amount of product they're coming out with? Or are you just doing your own thing, kind of running on your own, and you do what you can do and they'll do their thing and you do your thing?
Well, Rotofugi and I had a little bit of an issue in that the original Marshall series and the original Teardrip series came out whatever year it was that they came out. And, back then blind boxes were still fairly cheap, and they were, it was a 3-inch dunny. And these figures, I think the Marshall was pretty close to 4 inches and the Teardrips are 5, something like that. And those pieces, back then a dunny series was probably 250,000 units. Their production size was gigantic. And those two, the Marshall and the Teardrip series, I want to say they were less than 15,000 units each. So really, really a fairly small run size in comparison, but also fairly simpler pieces. I think the Teardrips have between 7 and 9 pad prints on the face of each one, but still, in comparison, just one rotocast piece, but bigger. They were larger, and we originally retailed those for, I think it was $11.99. It was over $10, and we were like, wow, like this is a couple of bucks more than most people are going to pay for a blind box. And we sort of justified that by saying, well, but these are bigger pieces also. These aren't little blind box figures. These are slightly larger. So we figured it was justified. And I don't know if it was the economy, because it was right about the same time as some of the collapse of the economy, or whether we just misguessed what collectors were willing to pay for things. But both those series were very sales resistant.
It's a great term.
I mean, they did okay, but we thought, how are these not flying off the shelves? And we got a lot of people who said like, oh, these are great or whatever, but it just didn't translate into big sales. And after a couple of years, maybe it was even only a year, I said, I think we need to ease back the price on these. And we did. And we did a bit more because we had a little bit more margin on the teardrop. And the teardrips suddenly got a second wind. And those have just been a steady seller until they finally sold out 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So, but I mean, that was a blind box series again, less than 15,000 units. I mean, there are still Series 1 Marshalls available. Anybody who wants to wholesale, email.
Maybe one of our sponsors would like some of those. So our sponsors actually are the three great stores: 3D Retro, Strange Cat Toys, and My Plastic Heart. You can visit myplasticheart.com on the web. If you happen to live in the States and spend $75 or more, use our promo code TOYFAM at checkout and you'll receive free shipping on that order. If you go to strangeCatToys.com and want to save 10% off on your entire order, be sure to use our promo code MARSHAM. Or you can go to 3dretro.com or visit 3D Retro if you happen to be in the Southern California area. Otherwise, to stay on top of all the latest and greatest in designer toy news, be sure to like and follow SpankyStokes.com and TheToyChronicle.com. All right, Joe, we are running long here. We have a bunch of listener questions for you, so how about we deliver them to you in a lightning round format?
Sure.
All right, Teresa, have at it.
Okay.
I hate for this interview to end on me talking about, mediocre success, but okay.
No, we won't end it here. We'll wrap it up good with all these remaining questions. Okay.
All right.
How important is sale timing? Do you find event exclusives work best? Is it bad to sell right before or after bigger events, or does it matter and it's more about the toy itself? I
think each toy stands on its own, but the events are something that the collectors look forward to, and it creates a good platform for offering an item. Cool. Okay, one thing we totally didn't even get to is upcoming projects. So we've talked a lot about your history and things you've been working on recently, but is there any upcoming projects you want to touch on briefly? I know I've seen you sneaking something around a Max Toy Company project that's ongoing. Yeah, that's literally probably the biggest project that's in the works. That figure is going to be probably about 18 inches in its final size, or pretty close to 18 inches. Oh, massive in size. Wow. Yep. So is that coming out at Decon, or is that just currently in the works? I'm hoping, but okay. Production is a fickle mistress, if I can mix my metaphors. Any other deets you can share on that, or is it all under wraps and we'll just have to wait and see? You know what? I just made a post on Instagram right before we got on this call that people who know Mark's stuff, I think will be able to figure out what this is, but a full reveal will probably come in the next week or so. Okay. Early November. So speaking of Decon, y'all know I love my Scoopy Scoops, Leaky Leaks, Sneaky Peeks. So do you got any Decon deets for us? Any Algonac colorways? Any other goodies you're planning to bring? Yes. So there'll be there'll be a GID Chinese folk tiger. That'll be at My Plastic Hearts booth. And there will be a very, well, by Algonac release sizes, a small Algonac colorway And then I'm going to do a very small painted large algonac release. Those all three will be at my Plastic Hearts booth at Decon. And then I'm pretty sure that we're going to have another new familiar colorway at
Horrible Adorables.
At Horrible Adorables.
Mm-hmm.
And possibly something at Mac's Toy Booth.
Oh, okay. I like it. Okay. Getting into some listener questions. What's your favorite New York toy store to collaborate with, Joe?
Let's see. No, Vin and Bick are fantastic. I love those guys. My Plastic Heart, to be clear.
He actually didn't even ask me to ask that, but I'm pretending like he did. This one's a 3-parter. I actually like this one. So, is there a favorite piece you've produced?
Oh, I saw that. I think Robin's Nest had asked that, didn't they? Boy, that's like trying to, make me pick which of my 2 kids I love more.
I know, right?
I'm pretty proud of everything that I've ever produced, and I do love it all. I would say, on a whole, I definitely like the Snibora Lake Monster series that I painted. In fact, most of those I actually painted in collaboration with Kirby. So I should definitely include him in that. We work out all those paint schemes together. And I mostly hold the airbrush, but any of the wipes or anything like that, he did. So I guess maybe those.
Okay, that was a loaded question. Well, here's an easier one for you. If you had to pick a favorite, who would you choose between Chris Reiniak or Amanda Louise Spade? I'm kidding. Don't answer that. Next question.
I saw that earlier. I was going to try and make up something funny, but the 2 of those guys are peaches. I love them both.
You can't. They're a bonded pair. You can't have one without
exactly.
Okay, back to this. Okay, we talked about. Is there one piece you thought would take off and didn't? I think you kind of answered that when you talked about the tears rips and the Marshalls, just from a number of piece perspective, that it ended up not really aligning with.
Those are both solid sellers. Is the truth of that. The piece that we always thought like had success written all over them and really never got much traction were actually the Tinder toys. The Jeremy Tinder toys, which are 3 different pieces. It's a Clem, a Rabbert, and a Boiger. There are actually 6 other heads that were sculpted as a part of that series, and I have master molds for those, and 2 other bodies. And because of the sales on them, I just never put them into production.
Interesting. Kind of want to. You should share what the heads were. At least like show people what could have been. Do like a little TBT post and just say, because there's some people I see in different Facebook groups like toys that never came to be or toys that were never made. It'd be interesting just to see, for you to show the history there.
Yeah, part of my Halloween resolution this year is to post more to social media. So maybe I'll start putting stuff on Instagram.
Yeah, no, that'd be awesome. And do it in the feed and not in the stories.
Okay, next one.
You guys, there's no way Gary's going to be able to edit this down. He can't do this long a podcast.
I know, but I'm not done.
You can cut out all that crap I said about my past.
All right, Gary, you got your work cut out for you on this one, buddy.
Just so the listeners know, we're over a 2-hour record right now.
Let me just get through the questions. They're almost done. You can decide what to do with it then. Okay? All right, we'll do super quick. One piece you were surprised at the length it has gone, the opposite. What was the most successful, you think?
Sniboras, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think I could still make and sell Sniboras, to be honest.
I think you could too. I'm not getting into that as a loaded question. We'll have to save that for another time.
You can DM me.
Well, we had this really big conversation around handmade versus 3D printing, and that's just that's just complex. So we'll just
we're just
not.
gonna have to have Joe back on, and I know by then we're gonna have listener questions about. Everybody's gonna want to make their own toy, and they're gonna want to talk to him more. So I think we should plan for a second episode later on when people have heard this and they now have all the questions about production, because we didn't really even get into all that.
I know, and well, Joe basically just said out loud, you can reach out to him.
Oh, I will be. Don't worry. I keep saying that. I've been saying it for years, but I keep forgetting that he's there making stuff, and I need to just get there and get him. So you're coming. There'll be an email coming from me, I'm sure.
All right.
Good, George. All right. Well, then let's wrap this baby up. This has been fun, Joe.
A true pleasure. Thank you very much.
And we will see you soon at DesignerCon, less than a month away.
Yeah, I guess I better book my ticket.
What? Yeah, book that ticket. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be a blast.
No, I'm planning on going. I just haven't bought the ticket yet.
Okay.
What? All right, yeah, you've got some work to do. All right, so let's wrap this shindig up and take a minute to let everyone know where they can find you. So, Joe, you go first. Where are you out on the interwebs?
Well, anybody can find me on Instagram at Squibbles Inc. That's SquibblesInk. And you can email me at joe@squibblesinc.com.
Nice. Thanks for joining, Joe.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Gary, you go next.
Gary Ham on Instagram, superham.com. George, where can people find you?
Hold on, I'm writing down that email. Okay.
Gary, you're not hosting. I am, so I'm supposed to say that.
My bad.
Don't be passing that baton. George, you're next.
Double G Toys on Instagram.
All right, and I'm
Smooth.
Teresa Hawkins. What?
That was smooth.
You can repeat. Gary's going to be editing anyway. Fix
Nope.
yourself.
Nope, keeping it. Making it even longer.
All right. Well, I'm Teresa Hawkins, TMHawk24 on Instagram. This has been the Marsham Toy Hour. We do this every week, and not because we have to.
But because we want to.
Exactly.
Exactly. Thank you, Joe, my co-host, leaving me hanging. But anyway, what were you going to say, Gary?
I was going to say because I want to edit it.
Nobody knew he was so long-winded before you asked him on the show.
Right. Oh, man. No, we love you, Joe. All right. Well, until our next transmission, we're signing off. So I don't know what we say after that. Bye.
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 Thanks, Joe. All right. Well, guys, I can hear my kids screaming. I think my wife's going to strangle them. I really do need to part ways and go get them to bed. So, Joe, thanks for joining. I will try to get this edited up this weekend for a Monday release.
Sorry for all the jibber jabber.
No problem. That's what editing's for. Otherwise, Joe, Teresa, I will talk to you guys later.
Thanks, Gary.
Yep.
All right.
I got to drop too. Thank you,
Bye,
Joe.
Teresa.
This was fun.
Yep.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
but because we want to.
Exactly. Thank you, Joe, my co-host, leaving me hanging. But anyway, what were you going to say, Gary?
I was going to say because I want to edit it.
Nobody
right,
knew
well,
he was so long-winded before you asked him on the show.
Right. Oh, man, no, we love you, Joe. All right, well, until our next transmission, we're signing off. So I don't know what we say after that. Bye.
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 Thanks, Joe.
Forget the sponsors.